going back to this slide right here, notice that the slope and the elasticity, I'm going to say, of both supply and demand are relatively equal. Which means that, given this example, the economic incidence of a tax was split about 50-50. But what happens if the elasticities are not relatively equal? What if supply is more elastic than demand, or what if demand is more elastic than supply, relatively speaking? So for instance, what happens if the elasticity of demand for cigarettes is very, very high in absolute value terms relative to the elasticity of demand for, relative to the elasticity of supply for cigarettes? Well, again, use your tax wedge shortcut. Here's a new demand curve, much flatter, much more elastic. The supply curve hasn't changed. I'm going to take that green tax wedge of $3, start over here, and move over from the left, so move right until it just touches both supply and demand at the same time. And at that point, I can identify the price that buyers are going to be paying post-tax, the price that sellers are going to receive post-tax. And as you can see, starting, kind of compared to P star, which was the original price paid and received, sellers incur a much deeper discount. Right? The price that they receive post-tax is much lower relative to the price that the buyers pay post-tax. So in this example here, because demand is so elastic, and as a result, it's harder to pass on a tax increase onto buyers, most of the economic incidence of a tax is falling on sellers. Far more than 50%. So for instance, if the government were to tax Coke and not Pepsi, two commodities that are very, very close substitutes in consumption, it would be very, very hard for sellers to raise the price of Coke and not raise the price of Pepsi, and really keep buyers in the Coke market. A lot of consumers would just flood to the Pepsi market because Coke is relatively more expensive. As a result, sellers have to take the hit and incur most of that tax in terms of lower prices received. As is maybe a bit more realistic for the case of cigarettes, if the elasticity of demand is very, very low relative to supply. Maybe this is because, as is the case with tobacco products, maybe buyers are addicted. We're going to see that most of that economic incidence of the tax is going to be falling on buyers. Again, take that green tax wedge, start from the left, move over until it just touches both supply and demand curve, and at that point you've identified the price that buyers pay post-tax, and the price that sellers receive post-tax. And as you can tell, most of that tax, most of that green line is going to be falling on buyers. Sellers do incur a small reduction in the quantity, in the price they receive, but nothing in compared to the higher price that buyers pay post-tax. And again, we know that cigarettes are very, very expensive in states that have high cigarette taxes, because sellers can easily pass on cigarette taxes to buyers, because buyers are addicted. There's not a lot they can do, at least in the short run, to escape paying a higher price.